Hi, my name is Jeff. I'm part of the teaching team here at Rainier Christian Church, and we are continuing in our series, The After Party. You know, one of the reasons we're in this series is because we want us to be a people who have both a high degree of hope and a high degree of humility entering into a divisive political presidential election season. Now, you may or may not be surprised, but it appears that there's been an uptick in the embrace of conspiracy theories over the past few decades, that more and more conspiracy theories are being embraced. And one that I sort of missed at the time that it happened was this group, Birds Aren't Real, which purported that there are birds that actually aren't birds. They are drones being employed by the government. And so let me read just one article to kind of get us up to speed on what exactly is Birds Aren't Real all about. And so this article goes on to write, the Birds Aren't Real conspiracy is a movement developed by Peter McIndoe, 23, who started spreading the idea in 2017. Until a December 2021 interview in the New York Times, McIndoe stayed in character as a true believer, insisting in media interviews and online that birds aren't real, but they are rather surveillance drones made by the U.S. government. Birds Aren't Real has a staff. It has organized real-life protests. It has bought real-life billboards. It has organized things on their vans with their claim. The goal, says McIndoe, is to parody the misinformation that Gen Z finds itself stewing in. Birds Aren't Real is not a shallow satire of conspiracies from the outside. It is from the deep inside, he told the New York Times. A lot of people in our generation feel the lunacy in all this, and Birds Aren't Real has been a way for people to process that. The experiment revealed that conspiracies sometimes grow by credulity. Local media sometimes reported on Birds Aren't Real as if it was something young people really believed rather than an elaborate joke. Birds Aren't Real organizers hope the joke will become a force for good by exposing all the way misinformation thrives. Yes, we have been intentionally spreading misinformation for the past 4 years, but it's with a purpose, McIndoe said. It's about holding up a mirror to America in the internet age. Now, Birds Aren't Real, whatever you may think about it, good, bad, indifferent, or otherwise, shows how easily we can be misled by misinformation, how easy it is to find ourselves embracing conspiracy theories that are not founded in reality. And what's weird or quirky to us, or maybe we don't quite understand, can get a little more depressing when we consider some of the rates at which Americans embrace some conspiracy theories. So the long-standing one, that the 1969 moon landing was faked, about 1 in 5, 20% of Americans still believe that original moon landing was faked and recorded here on planet Earth. But also the same rate of individuals that believe the moon landing was faked also believe, 1 in 5 Americans believe that 9/11 was an inside job perpetrated by the U.S. government in some way, shape, or form. There are, wilder theories out there that you can, again, I'm not encouraging you to, but you can find online, like the Denver International Airport is a secret base for the Illuminati in which they will control the world or ride out the destruction of the world in a giant underground bunker there, okay? Now, I'm always intrigued by the conspiracy theories that people end up embracing. How did you come to hold that viewpoint, okay? But what concerns me the most is the rate at which some of these theories continue to grow and expound and hold sway over significant portions of the population. And even for myself, speaking for myself, I have had to find myself in recent years guarding against this temptation to see something happen and my first thought being, I wonder if that was rigged. I wonder what's really going on there, and I've had to guard against, in my own heart and mind, this cynicism. Now, this is not a sermon about conspiracy theories, but they exemplify the problem that I want to talk about that can be part of our hearts and minds. Maybe you struggle with this as well at some degree, that the presence of cynicism is alive and well and active in your heart and mind, and we don't like what it does to us, but we're not sure what to do about it. Because the problem with embracing, conspiracy theories, the problem giving into really the root cause of that cynicism is that it erodes trust in our institutions. And pushed further, our cynicism erodes our trust in other people and leads us to become further and further disconnected from others. A deeply distrustful world is a breeding ground, not simply for conspiracies, but for a deep cynicism to rule and to reign in our hearts. It divides us from one another. It squelches both our hope and humility. And while that's not good for any of us, it's also completely contrary to walking in the way of Jesus. And so it's why we're in this series, The After Party. We followed this framework from a study that you can get a free account right now, media, from our resource page on our website at rainierview.org. But what we mean by, again, being people who don't give in to cynicism is not just putting a bumper sticker, kind of solution. God's in control. He's already won the battle. And then we turn a blind eye to the problems and the tragedies that are going on in our world. No, we're not saying that. What we are saying is that we want to point the way towards living in a deep trust of the true and living God. In this default place, this default way we view the world, that God is good and He's alive and work and active in the world, and we can be confident in that. That we do not become a people who give in to despair, because what? Our calling is to spread the good news, the Bible tells us, of Jesus, okay? And while it's never been easier in our world to tear things down, to give into cynicism, because we perceive what's wrong in the world and just want to throw up our hands and say there's nothing we can do about it. It's a completely different thing altogether to work for good in our world, to take the kinds of actions that lead to positive advocating for good in our world, to work for a world that Jesus instructs us to pray for, that on earth as it is in heaven. That's the kind of actions that we seek to take in the world around us. Simply put, we need to know this in the face of cynicism, that tearing down is easy, but building up is courageous. Tearing something down, pointing out a problem, that's easy. Building up something takes courage. And so we're going to talk about the cynic today. And so I want to kind of recap those four quadrants, if you will, from our study. And so one axis is humility, the other is hope. And so there are four places that we can find our inner life, okay? Our hearts, our minds, our attitudes we can find ourselves in. The first one is that box of the combatant who is high on hope, okay? Right? Those of us that we are certain of the right people, the right responses to all the issues. We don't need to have any more discussion. We've got it all figured out. And so, yeah, there's no more to talk about. You might be high on hope, but you find yourself low on humility. You don't have any empathy towards anyone else who disagrees with you. And yeah, they're just idiots and they need to get on board, okay? And so we don't want to be the combatant because we don't want to live with a lack of humility that's instructed for us to live out of in the Bible. That's just core to being a follower of Jesus, because Jesus interacts with people in all different places, socioeconomically and in diverse groups of people in his ministry. We're called to engage with others with that same humility. So that's the combatant. Kind of the other side of this, kind of the box of the exhausted, we might be relatively high in humility. We say, there's a lot of different solutions to the problems that we face, okay? But we're low on hope if we're exhausted. But I just don't see a way that we're ever going to get to any of those solutions actually being enacted. I don't see anyone pointing the way to do that. Now, we want to get to that spot on the chart, the disciple. We want to be people that are high on both hope and humility, fueled by both of those things. That's going to lead us to be people seeking to make a difference, to see lives change the way that Jesus would want us to. But today we've got to talk about the box of the cynic. What do we do when we find ourselves in a place where we're low on both hope and humility? What do I do there? Because if we're in the place of the cynic, right, there's no hope of anything getting better ever. Don't bother trying. Don't bother caring about anybody. Described in week one when I was talking about the exhausted as, the cynic is kind of like the snarky Eeyores of our world, right? Just like nothing's going to get better. Everything's terrible. The end. And so we want to look actually at biblical examples, people from the Bible who found themselves in these different places. and how they instruct us that we can move from there and not live there and make our permanent address there. So turn with me to John chapter 20. We're going to look at the example of Thomas here and see how we can, again, work past and through our cynicism on our way to being true, committed disciples. Now, in John chapter 20, this is post Jesus' resurrection. It's immediately following the resurrection. But Jesus' followers are still struggling to understand exactly what is going on here, because they heard Jesus talk about this resurrection and new life, but they're having a hard time wrapping their minds around it. Maybe to them, it sounds a little bit like a conspiracy theory. It's a little bit crazy. How could this work? And so they find themselves in varying places of doubt and questioning immediately after Jesus' death, how the resurrection could be possible. And so one of the disciples out of the group, his name is Thomas, we often think of him as his name being Doubting Thomas, which I think is incredibly unfair to this guy. One moment of doubt and questioning, right? And it marks your entire identity. You're just reduced to this one thing. So again, don't think it's a fair shake, but let's look at the example of Thomas here. John 20, beginning in verse 24. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. They told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, I won't believe it, unless I see the nail wounds in his hands, put my fingers into them, place my hand at the wound in his side. 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound in my side. Don't be faithless any longer. Believe." "My Lord and my God," Thomas exclaimed. Then Jesus told him, "You believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me." Now, first of all, we see that Thomas has this moment of doubt and struggle. But what I want us to see here is that he still shows up in the room, okay? He is highly skeptical in the moment, but he chooses not to remain in that box of cynicism. Instead, he chooses to push past it, to show up. See, the cynic chooses to remain completely disengaged, snipes maybe behind the keyboard or a phone at all the problems at the world and ridiculing others with no solution to put forward. And this is an important lesson, I think, for us to learn from the example of Thomas here in this gospel account, for those of us that are more skeptical and analytical. Maybe at work, have you ever heard this phrase, paralysis by analysis? Right? We're always analyzing and trying to figure out the right thing to do, but we're never actually taking any action. Well, cynicism is when we're paralyzed to do good because all we do is point out what is wrong. We like to name what's wrong. We criticize everything as not good enough, not the right solution. We're giving in to criticism. At the end of the day, choosing cynicism is giving in to the temptation to choose the easy way out. I don't think that the majority of people make their permanent address in cynic land, but we can end up moving there if we aren't paying attention, because tearing down is so easy to do. But building something up takes courage. I think Thomas, what I love about him is that he gives us a model for how to question, but how to question well. He's not afraid to be the one out of the group who admits, I'm not sure what's going on here, guys. We need to really think about this. He doesn't blindly go along with just like puts his hope with no rational thought. No, he's bringing his questions all of himself. He refuses to fake where he's at, and he's honest about that. But nor does he isolate himself from community, right? He doesn't show up claiming, oh, I know better than you guys, right? He doesn't give in to that temptation. See, the miracle here is not simply Jesus showing up in the room, but also Thomas, in the midst of his doubting, maybe in the midst of his cynicism, he still chooses to show up. He's in the room to be found. Again, when we wrap ourselves up in a cynicism, what in essence we're doing is we're saying, I have no expectations, so I can't be let down. I can't be hurt, right? It's a defense mechanism that we put out, but it robs us of hope and humility that Jesus commands us to live out of if we're following him. And so Thomas takes the step to be courageous, of moving out of this place of trying to find certainty that all this Jesus stuff was just a waste. Hey, it's game over, guys. Let's just pack it up, move on with our lives. No, because he has the courage to take a step away from the cynicism and towards hope, everything changes for Thomas. Now, if you're a cynic, here's why your perspective still matters. Here's why your perspective matters. Because the cynic is not easily convinced, and they're the most likely to be informed. They teach the church and those around them the importance of discernment and seeking to learn. Okay? Because too often we are too eager to have others do the dirty work of thinking for us. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the majority of people consume most of their knowledge in the form of 60-second or less reels. Okay? And it's impossible to have a deep, coherent thinking about a well-crafted, multifaceted solution by just consuming something for 60 seconds or less. It just requires more time to think deeply about an issue and land on a solution that will actually work. But what takes time to build towards a positive solution, negativity, 60 seconds or less can tear it down just like that. It's so much easier to spread negativity than to work at a positive solution for something. It's no wonder why we are increasingly cynical. And even thinking back to our opener, right? We end up embracing conspiracy theories as people because they kind of function as a shortcut to knowledge. I can just see this one massive conspiracy or this one thing, and it's just kind of like the silver bullet that solves all of the questions I have. Everything just leads back to 2 shooters on the grassy knoll instead of just one. That's a JFK assassination reference. But anyways, we're not going down the rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, right? But another thing conspiracy theories do is they disrupt the deep work of seeking to really gain knowledge and clarity around something. Now, this type of reaching for a simple solution, it's nothing new. In fact, we see it alive and active in Jesus' day. Look with me in Matthew 28, beginning in verse 11. We see in Matthew's gospel this record of a first century conspiracy theory that was put forth to combat the good news of Jesus and that resurrection power being true. This is what we read, Matthew 28, verse 11, beginning in verse 11. While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. Again, that people group in that century at that time. And so the temptation for us to not do the deep work of thinking with deep discernment has always been present for us as humans. Just reach to a simpler answer, a simple solution that explains everything. But you and I cannot have a well-informed, robust thinking on any issue by just skimming a headline or reaching to a simple solution. Thomas gives us a model of being rational, but yet not allowing that rational thinking to keep us trapped in a cynicism. And it speaks to, I think, the greatest temptation to be avoided for when we're faced with being cynical, when we find ourselves in a cynic box. Okay? The temptation is that we're quick to criticize everything, but are unwilling to contribute anything. Quick to criticize everything, unwilling to contribute anything. Thomas, whom again we open looking at primarily known as Doubting Thomas, he is known historically as the disciple who's the first one to take the gospel, the good news, to India. And today there are churches that bear the name of Thomas there. Okay? Thomas did not let his cynicism stop him from stepping out in faith and making an amazing difference in his life. And so how do we keep ourselves from not being trapped by cynicism, by not getting stuck in there? And so each one of these weeks in this series, we want to give you a formative practice. So the formative practice for when we find ourselves in a place of cynicism is this: help someone with your knowledge. If you find yourself in a place of cynicism, help someone with your knowledge. Because our world, like I said, doesn't need more people to tear down and criticize. Plenty of that going on, okay? Ultimately, that's the easy and less courageous move. The courageous move is to say with humility, I don't have all the answers to our world's problems figured out. But here's what I have personally discovered that is making a difference. Here's what I am choosing to invest and build into. And then not only share that, but stick with that. One of my favorite verses is Galatians 6:9. It reads this way: "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." The best cure for cynicism is to show up and serve one another in a way that you can make a difference in over time, that you can commit to day in, day out, week in, week out, month in, month out, year over year, okay? And by the way, you don't have to. The way that God's calling you to make a difference is likely not to cure cancer, to end all human trafficking. I'm not saying that we shouldn't step into big problems. But for most of us, it's a commitment to a smaller practice that we can engage in right where we are at. You know, I was reminded of this recently. Somebody who is beloved at our church passed away, Jan Carlson, and so at her memorial, she lived almost 90 years of life, and there were hundreds of people at her memorial. That's usually not the case. And one of the things that was shared repeatedly was that she was someone who was encouraging to others. She would write encouragement notes and cards to other people, something that she stuck with and did over and over and over again. And afterwards, my wife, Amy, and I were talking, and she said, you know, it just reminded her of, you know, a couple decades earlier, somebody in her life who had passed away, an older woman in the church who had been a mentor. And at Candy's memorial, right, again, a lot of people gathered to honor her memory and to again, celebrate her life. But I remember her husband standing up and saying, hey, you know, by the way, who here received a card from Candy and was encouraged by that? And nearly every single hand in the room went up. Sometimes it's just embracing a simple practice that I am going to be an encourager of others. I'm going to be someone who sends encouraging notes. And sticking with that, that can make an amazing impact. That's what stuck with hundreds and hundreds of people. What is the way that God is calling you to make a difference in the world? But you might say, okay, Jeff, but what if I don't have an answer for like a big problem facing us? I want to make a difference. I want to make this impact, but I just don't know where to begin. Well, where we begin in the face of big problems is that we take that together to God in prayer. Okay? And as we do that, as we seek to increase our humility, I don't have the power on my own to change things. I don't have to have all of the answers figured out. We also increase our hope. But we know and worship a God who cares for all of humanity far, far greater in an infinite way beyond our tiny, limited way. And so we don't opt then to submit ourselves to a political party or power to figure out all the answers. That, well, the world seems out of control, and so I'm just going to trust in this individual or this party to be the ones to fix everything. That's not what we do if we're following in the way of Jesus. Nor do we live in this smug cynicism. Well, that idea is not going to work, and we don't put forward any positive good into the world. Now, in essence, either one of those responses can become idols in our life. Right? An idol is anything that we worship besides God. And so for some of us, our worship is of, again, this human power that we think is going to fix everything. Or our idol is that my cynicism is just this cocoon that I wrap myself in so that I'm just not disappointed, or that I have this smugness, that I'm just, you know, I'm above it all. Okay? What is the call of the gospel, though? To turn from other solutions, from lesser powers, to embrace, as Thomas did, the resurrection power that Jesus makes available to anyone and everyone. I love the example of the church in the first century in Thessalonica, and this is what's written about them. A group of people that had to sacrifice to trust in the resurrection power of Jesus. But this is what Paul, a leader in the church, writes of them. He says, and so you became a model, beginning 1 Thessalonians, beginning verse 7. And so you became a model to all the believers in Macedonia and Achaia. The Lord's message rang out from you, not only in Macedonia and Achaia. Your faith in God has become known everywhere. Therefore, we do not need to say anything about it. for they themselves report what kind of reception you gave us. They tell us how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who rescues us from the coming wrath. So you and I face the same trust decision that we have to make. What power am I ultimately going to trust in? Am I going to be like the Thessalonian church in the first century? Am I going to place my sole trust in the one true living God of the universe who's already acted for my good and the good of all through the person and work of Jesus, making available resurrection power? Is my trust going to be in that? Or is my trust going to be really in those two options of what the Bible would say is idolatry at some level? That the forces shaping my world are so great that I can't do anything about it. I'm just going to give up on it all. Nothing can get better. That's just an idol that we're worshiping to bring ourselves comfort. Or the other extreme, my idol's going to be, I'm going to put all my hopes into a political group, into a political individual, and they're going to solve everything. They're going to make everything in my life better and fixed somehow, rather than seeing my primary hope should be in the true and living God of the universe, who invites me to put my allegiance, my trust first and foremost in what Jesus has done for me. And that choice, that mindset to trust in a God who's already acted for our good changes everything. What might change if we pray the way that Jesus asked us to? What's known as the Lord's Prayer, Jesus' instructions for how we are to pray. We can read this in Matthew 6, beginning in verse 9. Jesus says, "This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name," meaning holy be your name. "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." What might change for us if we prayed that way? May things be here as you desired them to be, as they are in heaven. And we believe that not just cognitively, but in our heart and our soul, with all of our emotion, that, man, Jesus is Lord. He's alive and working active. What if we turn from any and all idols that we're embracing as sources of power to see change happen in our world, more than trusting in the one true God of the universe? I think we would find ourselves elevated out of that box of cynicism if we did. We don't have to settle for a lesser power. Not saying leaving behind a commitment to pursuing the truth, doing discernment, doing that work, taking that with us, okay? But we're leading with the call to embrace the mission that Jesus has given us, that as we go about our lives, we help point the way to Jesus, to help other people begin following him. That in the way we interact with other people, especially with those with whom we disagree, we live out Jesus' command to love our neighbor as ourself. It is not optional, it is commanded by Jesus. What might look differently in Pierce County, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, if we reject the comfort of the spaces of cynicism, in the combatant, in the exhausted, and we stepped out and said, I am going to take Jesus seriously and become a person who is marked not only by a deep humility, but a high level of hope because of the one I know who is sovereign and in control of all. And so it's our hope that you'll join us back here next week as we wrap up and talk about the disciple. How do we do just that? Let me close with a prayer that we've prepared for you for this series. King Jesus, when we're combative, teach us to be humble. When we're exhausted, teach us to hope. When we're cynical, teach us to love. In all that we do, remind us that our loyalty belongs to you alone. And may the words of our mouth and the meditation of our heart be acceptable in your sight, you who are our Lord, our strength, and our Redeemer. Amen.